Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this Berkeley County Board of Education Budget Workshop meeting this March 29th, 2022. To call the meeting to order, I declare a quorum of members are present. The media has been notified. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion from Ms. Tanner, second from Dr. Wigfall, to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to note that executive session and a workshop is not what we normally do. And also the executive session information is very vague on not a normal meeting night. So that certainly makes the public question our transparency. I just wanted to say that so everyone could hear it.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment, Ms. Wofford. It is important to note that the administration requested the executive session item, and I feel it relevant to the discussion. We will very likely have some sort of action coming out of executive session this evening, so that's the reason for the executive session. So is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of approving the agenda, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it by a vote of 4-1. I need a motion to enter into executive session.
So moved.
We need a second.
Second.
We have a motion from Ms. Tanner, a second from Dr. Wigfall to enter into executive session. The stated purpose of the executive session this evening is a discussion of the evaluation, employment, appointment, assignment, demotion, or discipline of or release of an employees as needed. Is there any discussion?
Just like to note, I think this is very vague, and there are board members who don't know why we're going into executive session, so that's an issue.
Understand that. Hopefully the nature of the executive session will be made very clear once we return back to a regular session.
I do have a statement. If there are board members that did not know why they were going into executive session, they could have reached out to administration to ask why they were going into executive session. Is that correct?
Or the board chair.
They could have.
That's correct.
Well, the purpose of FOIA is to make it clear why you're going into executive session, not for my benefit.
Right.
But
Can we state
but for the benefit of the public when we're having a meeting not on a normal night. And I did ask administration why we're going into executive session.
Prior to the meeting?
Yes, we had that discussion.
Okay.
So you do know that.
I know there are other board members who text me today to say, do you not know why we're going into executive session?
But they also, too, could have called administration.
But the
So
purpose,
it was, and you're not the board chair, for them to reach out to you is not the right answer.
whether they
Just
text me or not
saying.
is not.
I'm
The
just
purpose
saying.
of FOIA is to tell the public why we're going into executive session and for it to be clear.
Were
And
the agendas not written the same way when you were the board chair?
I don't know, I mean, I
You
don't.
don't know what the agenda said when you were the board chair?
Oh, my God, for 5 years? No, I don't know what every executive session said, but I tried really hard for it to be transparent.
Okay.
And for executive sessions to be on regular meeting nights and to avoid special meetings. I've
So when we
said
go
that
into
already.
executive session during regular board meetings, when we go into regular executive sessions on regular school board meeting nights, do we have discussion of evaluation, employment, appointment, assignment, demotion, discipline, or release of an employees as needed? Do we have that on a regular school board meeting night?
Generally, yes, and that is for Dr. Whitley to give an employment update.
Not necessarily as legal updates as well as other business that are under the umbrella of that particular notification.
Okay,
And
I just have so if we're talking about budgets, and if there's anything that have to do with budgets, and if we're talking about discussion of evaluation of employment, appointment, assignment, demotion, discipline, or release of an employees as needed, and we're at a budget workshop, I would think that would support an executive session and something coming out to the public to have an action item would support an executive session And then if it comes out to an action item to the public, then they would understand why we went into executive session.
Agreed.
Does that, I'm just trying to make it, I'm trying to explain it to the public so they understand, because I see both sides.
Well, people read the agenda and decide if they're going to come or not because they try to figure out what we're talking about.
Right, so I'm just trying.
Is my only point.
And I understand your point. I'm trying to see both sides, so I'm trying to help. I'm all about education. You know, I say that I'm all about education, so I'm trying to put it out there for education. So, public, if you're watching, discussion, evaluation, appointment, assignment, demotion, discipline, or release of an employee as needed. This is a budget workshop. We are going into the back. That is something that is going to be discussed, and when we're coming out, and if something is going into action, we have discussed in the back something to that nature at a budget workshop. So that would be on the agenda.
Let me just clarify for a moment, because as you were aware, the board chair is responsible for the agenda in concert with the superintendent. And I would have been reticent to include this on the agenda had it not been germane to the topic of the budget. So let me just say that while I understand what you're saying, Ms. Wofford, the clarity was probably not as clear as it should have been or could have been. Nevertheless, I understand the nature of the executive session request, and it is germane to the budget discussion.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question of going into executive session. All in favor, respond by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it by a vote of 5-0. We are in executive session. We need a motion to return to the budget workshop.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Ms. Tanner, second from Ms. Marone to return to the budget workshop. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of returning to the budget workshop, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, nay. The ayes have it by a vote of 7-0. For the record, no action was taken in executive session. Do we have a motion that comes out of executive session?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the contracts in advance for 50 additional school-level allocations as discussed in executive session for the 2022-2023 school year.
Second.
I have a motion from Ms. Marone and a second from Ms. Tanner to approve the contracts in advance for 50 additional school-level allocations as discussed in executive session for the 22-23 school year. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, nay. The ayes have it by a vote of 7-0. The motion is approved. And the next budget workshop item is the budget workshop. We'll turn it over to Superintendent Jackson.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members, members of the audience. Thank you for, first of all, thank you for calling the workshop for the budget for the 22-23 school year. We've had some preliminary discussion with respect to the budget, funding formula, how it would impact Berkeley County School District, et cetera. Tonight, we have Ms. Smith and her team and also cabinet here as well to discuss in more detail the impacts of the funding proposal and also what it means for Berkeley County School District. In addition, you'll have an opportunity to look at some preliminary requests that have come from staff and school level. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Barrow, Superintendent Jackson, and board members. Go ahead and get started. Right there. So I'm going to start with the recap of the education funding reform that was presented. Well, I think I'm going to.
Click that way. Click that way.
Look that way.
All right. Thank you. So I'm going to start with a recap of the education funding reform that was presented at last week's board meeting. The plan includes a $4,000 increase to the state's minimum teacher salary scale, and BCSD is not funded for the increase. Our teacher salary scale starts at $40,987. The plan now also includes EIA funds, which includes our at-risk student funding and our aid to district funding. And early projections show BCSD allocation at $4.3 million. Thank you, that works much better. If BCSD funded the $4,000 teacher increase to our 2,979 teachers, the total cost would be $15.7 million with a shortfall of $11.3 million. When you add the mandated step increase, the shortfall is $15 million, adding the 18.1% health insurance increase along with the employer portion of the retirement increase, the total shortfall is $18.4 million over what we are allocated. So transitioning back to this year, I'm going to start with a little bit of good news. The board adopted the budget for 21-22, which allocated $7.5 million to fund balance. We've received and are expected to receive through June 30th additional revenue. Our additional revenue includes $2.6 million in local tax revenue, $6 million in fee and lieu, $1.3 million between EFA and state aid to classrooms, which is offset by a reduction of $3 million in the teacher salary supplement allocation. This brings us to a new revenue projection of $339 million. The 21-22 expenditure budget was approved for $339 million, and mid-year, the board allocated an additional amount to schools and departments for non-salary incentives in the amount of $498,000. At the next board meeting, I will be presenting a budget amendment to the board for approval of a balanced budget for 21-22. So moving on to 22-23, we started a more collaborative approach to the budget process. A team including human resources, finance, technology, maintenance, the Office of Federal Programs, and special education met with our principals to discuss any personnel gaps. We talked about allocation formulas, our travel formulas, supply formulas, and athletic allocations. We received a lot of positive feedback from our principals about the new process. When we asked about staffing gaps and hard-to-fill positions, our principals indicated at the elementary level staffing gaps for special education paraprofessionals, special education teachers, interventionists, and also custodians. At the middle school level, they indicated that it was the related arts. And for our high schools, their staffing gaps were mostly custodians.
I'd like to ask a question. I think I know the answer. Is it because the custodians' positions are allocated, but there aren't enough people that really want to fill those positions?
Yes, sir. I think that when they indicated those staffing gaps, they are allocated appropriately. They're just having a hard time filling those positions.
Because of salaries, perhaps?
Yes.
So when you start talking about positions such as those that are non-teacher specific custodians, we're competing with not only other school districts, we're also competing with industry. And so there's not a certificate in order to be a custodian. They can work for the school district, but they could also go and work for Walmart. They can go and work for a number of other places which outpace us with respect to compensation.
Even though we provide benefits, which some places probably don't, it's still not enough to sway people to come and stay with the school district.
Just with the hospitals in the area, they pay a lot more than we do, and they pay benefits as well.
Yes, some do, some don't, but yeah. I think that's an area that it looks like every classification really needs more custodians. They don't need the allocations, they need the bodies. And we need to do something to make sure that we can accommodate that, at least attract some more people to that. That's my opinion.
I know we had that issue at Daniel Island School. I think, didn't we contract it out with the company as opposed to trying to hire folks individually?
Yes, sir. Ms. McQuillan, that was a very popular initiative. It was so popular, in fact, the other schools that also are experiencing vacancies try to capitalize on that opportunity, and we have
Several schools that are utilizing the outside
several schools that have utilized it, and that particular entity at this point doesn't have the capacity to keep up, and so it was very effective when we implemented. However, the need is still great.
So can we take a look at the, particularly the custodial salary schedule and take a look at it and see, obviously, we've got lots of needs and the resources are defined and minimal to a degree, but nevertheless, if this is an issue across the board, this is something that I think we need to pay attention to in a primary fashion to try to we need clean schools. But with the COVID situation, with the cleanliness, with the sanitation and so forth, so I think it needs to be one of our priorities. Just my opinion again.
I agree, because right now we have some teachers that are vacuuming their own classrooms and wiping down their, so definitely a good starting point.
I've run a few projections on different levels of an increase for custodians, and I will make sure to bring that to our next budget workshop.
Awesome.
Very good, thank you.
So our next.
Could we also look too to see if there are any other third-party companies where we could work with them to try to get folks into? Because it may be that we can pay the same amount but just work through another company to try. Because I mean, it seems like part of this is we're competing with people, but part of it is generally the labor shortage too,
Yes.
and that folks can make more money sitting at home not doing anything with the current environment than actually working.
I don't know how, but yes.
So if anybody in Berkeley County is thinking of opening a custodial business, just know that.
Proceed.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
And the next question we asked our principals, if you could have one additional allocation, what would that look like? Our elementary principals are asking for special ed paraprofessionals and additional related arts. Our middle school, common theme, related arts teacher, and high school general teachers was the common theme there.
Interesting.
So we looked at additional considerations for the 22-23 budget. A lot of the principals expressed a need for support for SEL-related needs, multilingual families in high school, multilingual subgroups, funding support for non-monetary incentives, which is the $498,000 that I mentioned earlier that the board approved mid-year, increased supplies for Head Start programs. Our middle school asked for student body activity funds that is currently at our high school level only. Funds for freshman orientation, an increase in athletic travel. They requested an increase in the allocation for year one of a new sport at a high school. And we also discussed a plan for uniform replacements and band instruments. That's not necessarily a general fund request, and we can look at that again when we start talking about our capital plan.
For the band instruments, would that be all schools or is that school specific?
That would be school specific, if I can get that out, specific. What we would need to do is probably do a good inventory of our band instruments and make sure that we know what's on hand at each of our locations, and then make a plan going forward with replacements.
Okay.
So when we look at our revenue projections for local revenue and the House budget projections, they're estimated to increase this year by $20.4 million. So when you're looking at each line, our local tax revenue, the assumption there is an 8% growth over last year and no millage increase. So there's an increase there of 8.6. Our FELO increase is only $519,000. We are not going to have the EFA funding, the state aid to classroom and teacher salary supplement lines next year. That is part of the new education funding lines. So those are decreased completely. And our bus driver salary aid is increasing $116,000. We don't see a reduction or an increase to homestead exemption or local property tax relief. We also have our reimbursement for property tax relief is increasing by $3.4 million. Impact aid should increase by $350,000. And then when you add those two education funding lines, the $139 million and the $24, if you take the difference between those two lines and the lines above that are in the reduction, it's really about a $5 million increase over last year. And then estimated revenue for growth, which we always put in here in our budgets each year, is $1.9 million, bringing us to that $20.4 million over last year. So I talked about the local tax revenue growth of 8% and no millage increase. When we look at the expenditure side, we're going to talk about the new funding plan, including at-risk and aid to district, the mandated teacher step increase, mandated 1% increase in retirement for the employer portion, PIBA increase to health insurance of 18.1%, which is technically it's 9.5% because the increase doesn't start until January. An increase in insurance coverage, and of course, inflation. So we are adding an increase to our general fund salaries and benefits, and that's the two. Yes, sir.
And this may be a totally stupid question, but with the feds saying they're going to raise the federal fund rate and stuff, how, obviously that is to bring down inflation, but how is that going to affect us, or does that affect us as a district when that happens?
I don't really have anything listed here. It's just more a topic of conversation. I don't have any expenditure lines that are increased due to inflation. It was just to bring up that topic in case anyone had questions about that.
Okay.
So going back to the expected expenditures, we're looking at those increase in salaries for at-risk and aid to district, and that's a result of the new funding proposal. There are additional expenditures in those lines. It doesn't cover just salaries, but because those are two-year funds, we will have enough rollover for next year to cover the amounts that are allocated to the schools, but we need to go ahead and put the general fund put the salaries and benefits into the general fund for next year, and we will need to consider all of the other supply lines for software, any additional expenditures that we have in aid to district and at risk. We need to think about that for 23-24 school year. We also have a step increase for all employees that it's mandated for teachers. The total is $4.7 million. The portion of that for just teachers is $3 million. We have a mandated increase of retirement. It's $2 million. PIBA health insurance increase of 18.1%. Like I said before, it's 9.5% for next year at $2.3 million. And sorry about that line, insurance coverage. I should say an increase in insurance coverage, and that's for general liability, and mostly it's cyber insurance for 11.4. Yes, sir. Did you have a question?
So this is the mandated increase to retirement of 1% and the PIBA increase of 18.1. Is that for all employees?
That is covering all employees.
Not just teachers, okay.
That is all employees, yes,
All
sir.
right.
And the considerations, what the board voted on earlier this evening, the 50 positions needed for growth, that's 3.7. And we have done a 2% increase in the past. If we continue to do that, it would be $5.1 million. Those considerations are 8.9 total.
That's in addition to the step increase.
That is in addition to the step increase, yes, sir.
So it looks like the 11.4 and the 8.9 basically total the estimated increase in revenue
Of 20 million.
of 20.4.
Yes, sir.
And also, just for the sake of transparency with the board, the other night in executive session, you heard me discuss some potential positions. Those are not listed here, as those positions would be revenue neutral. I've worked with Ms. Smith and also work with Cabinet. We're trying to work with what we have, so to speak, and looking at our existing budgets and seeing where we can trim back to meet some of the requests or address some of the requests that we've made as a cabinet as well. So some of those positions, some of those initiatives are not listed here as they don't they don't rely on any new revenue. And so those will be listed at a later date.
So does this fall in line basically in what we heard last meeting from the auditors in terms of the needs of the district, in terms of additional resources and additional folks in the administration level? Is that accurate?
As far as what I just addressed, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
He's saying it's revenue neutral, so they'll find ways to cut costs in some places, but we'll allow them to add those positions that were discussed at the assessment so that we're not spending more money, but we're just finding places to cut it so that you
Correct.
can have more positions. Yeah.
So the last slide shows a balanced budget. It allows us to maintain status quo. It does not allow for any new initiatives or strategies except for the ones that Mr. Jackson just discussed. And as he said, he has charged Cabinet with reviewing our budgets and cutting our budgets back 20%. And that should offset some of the requests that we have, that we've received so far for our 22-23 budget. I think that's it.
So I wonder what this budget is going to look like and compare it for our teachers and our employees in terms of recruiting them and hiring them and training them and retaining them. Is there any other something that the administration may be looking at or planning, or that we might be able to do something additional to this?
So Mr. Jackson and I had a discussion, and I looked at the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 budgets, and I scrubbed those budgets, and I looked at some of the initiatives and plans that we had in place that we have either gone a different direction or looking at areas that maybe we started a salary or allocated a salary, but we have not yet hired that position, and because the funding only lasts for a few years, we could offset some costs. We could do a budget amendment to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, and I've identified about $5.8 million, and if we were able to do a budget amendment in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, we could potentially do a stipend. It would be only for those 2,974 teachers that were listed in those specific categories, but we could do a $1,500 stipend. I would not recommend at this time doing a salary increase, but we could certainly look at a stipend, and that amount does include fringe. So if we did that for all of those teachers, it would be about the $5.9 million.
When you say all those teachers, what, and you don't have to list all of them, but what are the various categories that qualify?
Unfortunately, I don't have the list in front of me.
No, it's no big
but
deal.
I can certainly provide that again at the next workshop. And it was quite an extensive list. It covers most of our teachers. I think there's probably, when we did the $1,000 increase last year for that salary schedule, I think there were only maybe 70 teachers that did not fit that category. So it really covers most of our teachers, yes.
Look on page 2.
Would that pretty much,
I did put it
So
in there.
would that cover the 4,000 that would?
I see it.
That would,
Yeah, I see it.
they would
I can see it.
expect that salary?
Yeah, I agree with that.
That was
Special
the
ed,
like
freaking
disconnect?
Barney, I see
That
it.
stipend?
Right, so we would not be able to fund a $4,000 increase, but we could offset it with a $1,500 stipend
Okay.
if we were able to amend ESSER 2 and ESSER 3.
So what about classified nurses?
But that,
Your admins, what about, all of them? It's,
right, but I think.
how would we leave them? What would we do there to take care of them? Is there
Nurses are on
anything?
this
School
list.
nurses would be included.
Nurses.
Awesome,
Yes,
okay.
yes,
I didn't
they're
look at the
included.
list, but you still have your admin,
Right, I
your
think-
principals and your APs and your classified. We've discussed them before, so where do you think we could be with that?
Well, unfortunately, with the new funding proposal, we're not receiving enough revenue to cover those types of expenditures. Go with the 2%?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was brainstorming earlier because I had a feeling this question would come up. And the only thing without going and putting a budget out there like we did last year where we're putting our expenditures over revenue, we could consider, instead of a 2% increase for employees, possibly considering a 1% or 1.5%, and that could offset the cost of doing something for, like we said, custodians earlier, and some of
Yes.
our classified staff as well, and increasing their salary to a more competitive rate.
You're talking about from the ESSER funds,
This would be from the general
from
fund.
the general fund?
But
Yes, sir.
Because it'd be
So
recurring.
on the second to the last slide, that was just a consideration.
That was just a consideration.
Those aren't
That was not a
mandates, that
mandate.
2%.
Right.
And so that can be adjusted. We can do 1, we can do 1.5, we can opt to do nothing at this particular point in time but the step. And so
Okay.
that was just put there for consideration. And so if we made any adjustments to that, what Ashley's saying is the difference would offset any increase to other classifications of employees.
Right, so we could touch more employees by doing that. And they would still get a percentage increase and a step for those who qualify. I have to be careful when I say all employees get a step, because all employees do not qualify for a
Right.
step.
I just think it's important that we try to touch as many employees as we possibly can.
Right, understand. And we will run some more numbers. That's the beauty of having 2 budget workshops, is we can have these discussions and come back to the
Of
table.
course, yes.
On the, if we did a 1%, that would cut that, I'm assuming that would basically cut that number
Cut
in
it in
half, so
half.
free up
Yes, sir.
2.5 million?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the stipend would be a one-time payment?
It would be a one-time payment, but it would give us a year to plan to try to do something in the future. So we would say this year we could do the $1,500 stipend and not increase the salary scale, but if there are additional funds in the future, I'm not making any promises, I'm saying, but we could potentially add that into the salary schedule in a future year, but it gives us time to plan for future years.
So again, my concern with the one-time
Yes.
payment is that it gets taxed at a much higher rate.
I understand.
Is there any way of paying that over time and not having it,
Not submitted in one lump sum?
right?
Absolutely. Yes, we could do it quarterly, twice a year, however we determine to pay it out.
Okay.
And then they wouldn't have taxes taken out, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you get a one-time lump, the government takes the majority of it.
It's taxed at a higher
Right, but if
rate.
you do the slower way, it's not so painful, I guess, okay. Okay.
So the employees under this would get a step increase of about 2%.
On average, it's about 2%.
And also, if we cut the pay increase from 2 to 1, that would basically give them a 3% total included. And it would also allow, like Ms. McQuillan said, to give us some flexibility for some classified folks in the amount of about $2.5 million. And this would be without any, this would be within budget.
Yes, sir. We would still have a balanced budget with revenue and expenditures. Mhm.
How much are we pulling from the general fund? Don't we have to have a certain percentage under state law, and then what would remain based on this budget in terms of what we're pulling?
As far as fund balance goes?
Yeah, fund balance.
So currently, our fund balance as of June of 2021 was $104 million. So if we don't increase it at all this year, and we stayed at that number, and we look at a $359 million budget, we would be at 28.94%. Our board policy requires 15%, and the state requires 8.33%. So we're almost double what our board policy is as far as fund balance goes.
Okay. On the local tax revenue, you said it was an 8.6% increase.
It's just an 8%.
8%?
Flat 8%, yes.
Is that each year, does that, obviously that percentage changes?
It
depending on what's
changes each
going on?
year, but I do have like a 6-year trend that I've looked at, and it ranges from about 6% up to 10%, but the last 5 years have been 8 to 10.
Okay.
Ms. Jackson, could you Could you get some information on what that $2.5 million might be used for in terms of those classified folks?
Absolutely. That's something we'll take that direction and run with it.
That's just my suggestion. I think Mac had a good idea to try to spread the wealth. We try to help the people that need help the most. And those are the folks in the trenches and the classified. And you're talking about cafeteria workers, custodians, clerical, secretaries, teacher assistants, all of those classified people. You may not be able to do a whole lot with $2.5 million with that many people, but you could either selectively do some things with a particular group or a minimal amount with everybody. So that would be something that I would like to have at least brought to us.
Yes.
We'll, how about we bring back some options?
Yes.
Bring
Do a couple
back
of
some options for the
scenarios and
board.
options.
Just the next one, yeah.
So with the budget, and we all know that with Act 388 and the way that our county is growing, and we don't get the money right until the people move here, and then they spend in here, and then that's how we get the funds. And we have more students coming in than schools can hold, and schools are very important. That my biggest thing is that we want to make sure that we have the teachers and the supplies to educate our children. Like, that's the most important thing for me. So with that being said, with Max said about like the outsourcing of custodians, I would like to see just numbers. I'm a numbers-driven person, especially when it comes to budget. So just different things maybe that we can see, maybe outsourcing, like the custodians, maybe bus drivers. I know this was a hot topic. I'm just thinking out of the box, right? So like if we outsource the bus drivers, if the buses break down, that's not our, like that's outsources, right? So now they have to fix that, right? So I'm trying to think, what else can we outsource? Just to get numbers.
Even if it's partial too, because that's what
They just
those
say a
folks
hybrid
at
model.
Malden said, yeah, like we do certain areas where we outsource transportation in that particular area.
Right.
Same thing with custodians, whether it's south side of the county, north side of the county, wherever.
Like things like that, you know what I mean? Like, and just compare, so then if certain areas we can do that and certain areas we don't, then that could be more money that we have, you know, to have the students, to have the teachers, to have the allocations, to be able to provide a higher salaries for the people that are coming into contact every day with our students. Not saying that the bus drivers and the custodians don't, but because we're going to need the money to build schools, like that's without a doubt. So if we can cut costs otherwise, I would just like to see those numbers.
Yes, ma'am.
If we hit a recession this year, that we won't see that effects until next
23,
year's
24.
budget.
23, 24, yes, sir.
All right.
And then, okay.
You were talking about the general budget, which what we're talking about now, and as we all know, but many of the public have no idea, that this is an operational budget from year to year, and it depends upon revenue that we get in from the variety of sources that we have. But you also mentioned the fact that we've got to build some schools, and it has nothing to do with the general fund here, because we all know that not one penny of the general fund money goes to building schools. But it is important, and we've had those updates, and we've talked a little bit about some of those options that are available to the board and to the public. So this is something we need to get out in front of, because the board has given Superintendent Jackson, the administration, the right to look into some land acquisition, and you know, the possibility of some revenue in the 1-cent sales tax or some other ways. We really need to get up front on this and to tell the public our needs and also the options available to us in terms of revenue. And as I see it, there's basically four things. The first is to basically continue with the 8% money, which basically doesn't change anything. The other is a bond referendum, which only property owners would pay for. The third is a penny sales tax, which I think we're very close to having enough, possibly, of the hospitality tax to actually put it on the ballot for November. Then it would be incumbent upon information for the public to become aware of the need. And the last thing is, and nobody wants to hear this, if the public decides that they don't want a bond referendum or a 1-cent sales tax, we will build some schools. We have to build schools. The only other option is a millage increase. I don't want that. Never have espoused that, never have proposed that. But the public needs to know what the options available to this board are, and as I understand it, we have considerable sway in terms of bond indebtedness, raising the millage on that, because we're an autonomous board. We can do that without anybody's permission. Nobody wants to do that. But I just want it to be stipulated and known that we have been criticized, possibly rightfully so, about not being proactive in terms of generating some funds and alleviating the crowding in some schools and the need for additional facilities in these fast-growing areas. So it's just something that I wanted to, and I've said it a couple of times from the dais, but this is a budget workshop. It doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the general fund budget, but the public needs to know that we need to build schools. We will build schools, and we want the right way to fund these schools without raising taxes.
Yes.
Chair Barrow, I think that this is a great budget workshop, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I think we need to have an educational workshop, something like this, to explain to the public how the budget actually works, because you're saying general fund, you're saying operational fund, and to the general public, they're looking at us like a deer in headlights because they don't understand the difference. And half of South Carolina, the Berkeley County is not from Berkeley County, I want to say, and they don't understand Act 388, they don't understand the property taxes, they don't understand the sales tax, and until they are able to vote and talk about the millage and know the options to them, they need to understand them. And I think that for us to come together and give an hour and to be able to discuss it like this to the public and say, this is what millage is, this is what this means, this is how it's going to affect you, this is the sales tax, this is what a bond referendum is. And we explain it and then we go for it. I think it would be very educational for the residents of Berkeley County. I think people don't even realize that when they go to Dorchester, they don't understand that they're giving their sales tax to Dorchester County. When they go on to shop on Rivers Avenue and they go to Target there, they're giving the money to Charleston County. So that's just my recommendation. 1 hour of an educational can do wonders for Berkeley County.
I think of those four options, the penny sales tax is the easiest pill to swallow, though, because it's not just the folks that live here that are paying it, it's the people that are spending money here.
That's right.
Agreed. But they're not going to watch an hour workshop for us, Mac. I would love it. We could put it in the hotel. Watch Berkeley County's.
Have it streaming.
Streaming.
So, so how they circulate. I also think we should nickel back for a minute and be transparent to the public about the action that we took from executive session. I think that the public should understand that we needed to do that this evening because we're losing out on hiring people right this moment. We're going to miss out on cream of the crop because Dorchester County, Charleston County, all the other counties within South Carolina are sending out contracts to these teachers, and teachers are not, looking to move and find a new home, and we want them to come to Berkeley County. And so I think that is very important for everyone to understand. We want the best for our children in Berkeley County School District. So.
Mr. Jackson, is there any other presentation or information that you or your cabinet need to share with us?
No, sir, that is it. Again, I just want to thank you all for calling the meeting and agreeing to come and have this discussion, look at this preliminary information. I appreciate the feedback. We will take this feedback and run with it. And as we said earlier, we will come back and explore these different options and come back with some various scenarios with respect to what $2.5 million can do for our employees, those specific groups, and we'll have some more discussion.
Fantastic.
And we'll be in, excuse me, Mrs. McQuillan, we'll be in contact with you, Mr. Jackson, in terms of calling the next budget workshop. I'm not sure when that will be. Ms. McQuillan, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I was just going to say, the one thing I'd like a little bit more detail on that provided is on the revenue neutral positions too, and where the cuts are going to be and that sort of thing, just so we kind of understand, all right, what are we cutting and where are we putting it?
Absolutely.
As well.
Absolutely. We just had that discussion not too long ago. Staff is working on it. We will provide that information to you shortly.
Any other discussion from any of the cabinet? If you'd like to hear from you, if you have any comments. Mr. Jackson, thank you, Ms. Smith. Always an excellent presentation.
Thank you very
We
much.
appreciate that. Tammy, thank you for taking notes. Any other discussion from any of the board members? Hearing none, we'll call a question, or excuse me.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, second. Ms. Marone seconds. Any discussion? All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned. Thank you for coming.